of the Tzemach Tzedek. Tomorrow is the birthday of the Rambam, so we have additional energy flowing. And we are on page 419 of the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer in AdHamtz Bereishis. And we are actually top of 442, I should say 420. We did do the first line of the next page, or the first two words of the next page. But essentially till the bottom of 419 and the beginning of 420. And this is, as I've been pointing out, the source text of a big part of the end of HaDevorim Beis. Apparently even more than that in some ways, as I shall explain. And because the Rebbe Rashab never ended up finishing writing HaDevorim Beis, at least we don't have the conclusion, but he did leave themes and questions open. But we do find in this Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, based on the Alter Rebbe's Maimer and Torah, the continuation. So obviously it serves not just as giving us context, but also can help us see where this would have developed and how it would have developed. And I'm trying to, throughout these classes, point out these parallels and where it's going. So where are we now? We are talking about, after talking about Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam and Ner Mitzvah v'Torah, big at length discussion about Torah and the different levels of Torah, including the written Torah and the oral Torah. He brings it back to Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam because at the end of the day, remember, all these forces come together. It's the neshama, which is compared to a candle of God that uses the candle of the mitzvah and the light of Torah to achieve its purpose in this world. So they're all interdependent. So the Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, and neshama has a certain amount of power, and the Alter Rebbe in his Maimer and the Mittler Rebbe explained that. That the Rebbe Rashab as well elaborated upon at length the discussion about the contemplation of the divine soul in Shema, which is preceded by Birchas Yetzer and the previous prayers, all to help prime, train, and tame, and harness, and direct the animal soul, which is the oil, the intelligence of the animal soul, to become fuel for divine love. That's what the neshama does even on its own, he said. The Alter Rebbe's words were, but then, Ner Mitzvah adds a whole other dimension, because Mitzvah is a makif that was given to us by Hashem, the Ratzon Elyon, and has the ability to take the material world, including the Nefesh Habamis, the Zgula Pratis. It's a special feature, special strength to help elevate the Nefesh Habamis even more, and so much more, even to the level of Torah, all the way to the Oyer of Torah, which is the Oyer Atzmi, in the words of the Rebbe Rashab, or in the words of the Mittler Rebbe, the Atzmus Ha'er, that is unaffected and undiluted and unchanged through its entire journey. The neshama comes down below, it gets concealed. That's why it needs mitzvahs and Torah, even though it's rooted in a higher place. Mitzvahs also, he didn't spell it out yet, but clearly he actually did spell out. A mitzvah is still Ner Mitzvah without the Torah, because it doesn't have the pure and undiluted divine revelation of Torah, as he explained on page 417. And that's why Talmud Torah is so critical. Torah is so critical, because the Torah provides that full, we'll call it the full experience of the divine in an undiluted and uncompromised way. But the neshama, when it's using mitzvah and using Torah, and we'll talk more about mitzvahs later, but now we're talking more about Torah, so that brings it all alive, because the Torah provides that gilui of Eid Ein Sof, like he said, from the highest levels, Muhus v'Atzmus levels, that in turn allow the neshama down below to elevate the animal soul, not just to the level of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, but the level of Ner Mitzvah and Torah Oyer, as we learned in the last few pages. What Torah Oyer adds to that. Okay. So then the last thing we learned was this is also the order and the progression of the tefillah. Shema Yisrael is the contemplation on Achdus Hashem, a contemplation that is also explained to and to the animal soul, that it too can understand that achdus. Therefore, it leads to v'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, loving God with all your heart, which means both parts of the heart, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. Also, the Nefesh Habamis is loving God. But then we want to elevate it even further to higher levels. So we come to v'haya advarim ha'ela asher anochi mitzavcha hayim. So he said, this is the koloin the chol levavcha be'ela l'kib mesiras nefesh. After the animal soul suspends and basically gets sublimated and completely consumed like the oil into the fire, the loving fire, the fiery love to Hashem, and it eliminates all ratzon zar, all strange desires, meaning the animal soul has obviously been transformed. Achar kach, so after that step, it becomes a keli lekabla oris erdetera shemeir ba me'ere ensof atzmei dafke. Now it's a keli, not just that's tailored to it, or like we learned about elokus, that is on our terms. The divine we experience like a mamala kalam, and as it relates to us. But you can experience Ein Sof and its Shemei B'Ein Sof Atzmei Dafke, meaning Ein Sof itself in its purest form on God's terms, which is a big chiddush. And this is in the form of Vahaya, Memela. Hoya Advarim Me'el, the Divrei Teira Be'er the Teira Shemelubeshes Behem, which in these words of Teira, Melubeshes manifests Anochi Misha Anochi. That's Atzmos Ein Sof Mamsh. And that's why we say, Asher anoichi mitzavcha hayem. Baal harotzen ha'elyon. Not just the rotzen, but the Baal harotzen. And the chochmei love Torah mitzvos. She'er zeh meir gam l'chesher the klippus neged the nefesh habam is that also this higher level of core atzmus ha'er should radiate also into the darkness of the klippus neged of the nefesh habamis. Because there's no shinei mahus. As we learned, that's why it gives it the power to transform darkness to light, because Torah was never subject to the darkness of the tzimtzum, not the tzirchesh chaliyah, not chesh chatachtim. So Torah retains that ability to bring into existence a level that's beyond darkness and light. And that's why the animal soul accesses that when it gets transformed from darkness to light, like we learned. To the point that it reaches even the moyer, which is even higher than the Eir of Torah Mitzvos, like we learned earlier. I'll talk about that shortly some more. Then comes the next section. What comes afterwards in Shema? After V'hafta V'haya Advarim Ha'ela, comes VShenantem Levanecha V'debarta Bam. You shall teach it, VShenantem, from the word Mishnah. And Debarta, I'm speaking, he says, this is now Torah Shebal Peh. Because Shenantem from the word Mishnah is Torah Shebal Peh, you're speaking, V'debarta is Torah Shebal Peh with the mouth. Shebedibur la'ayin, where you are immersing yourself in the pilpul to figure out all the details in order to transform the darkness, the crass darkness that we learned earlier, the role of Torah Shebal Peh. And this is like the words of the king when he decrees something. So even though God also spoke Torah Shebiksav, but here we're speaking and we are contributing and partnering with Hashem in the process of developing Torah Shebiksav into Torah Shebal Peh, Masnis in Malchus. So that's why the mission is called Malchus. So we're not just learning what the king's decrees are, but we're part of the process. We're like partners with the king, with the queen, in order to ligzer, to decree what is kosher, what is possible. And then finally, the last thing we learned was the Medik with the Barta Bom. He says, Barta Bom. You will, with the Barta Bom, which means not just with the Barta Boy, for example. You could say with the Barta, you speak about it. Bom is like within it. So he says, Loshan Hanhoga, it's a form of Hanhoga, of guidance or even leadership. Hanhoga is Dvar Malchus, Tadaber V'tanig, that speaks and guides and directs. Bom, in this way, Bom, but Eifon Habirurim, the manner of how we create that clarity and separation and refinement of the 248 sparks, but Erchezer Mamata Lamail. That's what Debarta Bom. Oy Pirish, another explanation, he said, that Bom means with Debarta Bom that you're drawing the Eir Ein Sof, like we learned earlier, that when a person learns Torah, they draw Eir Ein Sof, Alidei Adibur Nimshach L'Gili Eir Ein Sof B'Chochmah the Torah. So with Debarta Bom sounds like he's saying that you're mamshich through with Debarta Bom into Torah the Eir Ein Sof. which is what brings alive the Ein Sof within Torah. Okay, that's what we learned. Ready to continue, but before I do, I want to go back. I did my research, and I think I got to a clarity about the last paragraph, which we struggled with, about Ani Hashem Le'Shanisi. I wanted to do it before Pesach, before our big Pesach vacation, so to speak. And this is what I discovered. So it's going to be maybe a little surprising to some of you, even though I was preferring, and I still feel we could use it to understand the higher level of how the Nefesh Habamis itself experiences divine. But here's what I come up with. I also went back to Ayin Beis and learned that whole subject matter. There's a bunch of things I'd like to share. So briefly, what I was really looking for first, and I'll just tell you the process of how I did this, so it's also an education of how to research these things. I was desperately looking in Chassidus, where else is Ani Hashem Le'Shanisi Ubnei Yaakov Le'Chalisam. This is a key diuk. It doesn't say Bnei Yisrael. I kept saying Bnei Yisrael, Bnei Yaakov Le'Chalisam. How is it interpreted? I looked in the commentaries right away in Malachi, in the Pasuk. The commentaries explain it one way. The Gemara in Seita also has an explanation. But I was looking, where is their explanation where there's a matmiya? Because the Mittler Rebbe used the word matmiya, that the Navi is wondering. And in all the commentaries, they don't talk about a wonder. They talk about an equating that just as God doesn't change, so too the children of Yaakov will never be extinguished, will never disappear. And different explanations what that means exactly. So finally, I found in Likutei Torah, the Alter Rebbe in the Maimon Rosh Hashanah, Mikel Kamecha, and this is quoted in a number of places in Hemshech Samach Vav, and in Ayin Beis actually as well, in volume, I think I found it in volume 1, maybe in volume 2 as well, and another Maimorim of the Rebbe Rashab. So the Alter Rebbe teaches like this, that the Pasuk, the Navi is wondering like this, since it says, Ani Hashem Le'Shanisi, since it says Ani Hashem Le'Shanisi, that God is immutable, like nothing else in existence. Everything is subject to change. Everything we know is subject to change. The only thing that's subject to change is Ani Hashem, is the Eibishter. He's completely Lamaila, that just no difference between how he was before creation and after creation, as we also learned here at length, relatively. So since you know Ani Hashem Le'Shanisi, so the Navi is asking a question. He's wondering, Matmiya. He's wondering, so why is Bnei Yaakov Le'Chalisam? So why aren't you completely losing yourself in Mesiras Nefesh and Klesa Nefesh when you know that? You're aware that you have a God. The God is of a completely different reality. Unlike anything else, it should cause that you should completely expire in ecstasy and in complete excitement and lose your whole identity. That's what the Alter Rebbe says. That's what the Navi is wondering. Why is that not happening? When you become aware that Ani Hashem Le'Shanisi. And he answers, because it says, B'nei Yaakov Le'Chalisam. It's Yaakov. Since the neshama comes down below, and in the state of Yaakov from the word Akev, the heel, not Yisrael. Akev, which means it's concealed. In the Akev, you have very little chayis. It's considered to be, doesn't say this, but the Malach HaMovish Ba'adam, it says in Ovis the Rab Nosson and Medrash. The Akev considered a very low level. The expression is Yaakov. Yaakov is Yud Akev. The Yud of Elikus, of the spark of the divine, comes down all the way into the heel, which means the Yeridus and Neshama all the way concealed in the lowest levels of this world in the Nefesh Habamis. Because B'nei Yaakov, the Neshama is concealed, so we don't get excited and we don't completely lose ourselves, even though we become aware that Ani Hashem Le'Shanisi. That's how the Alter Rebbe explains it, and that's how it's quoted in a number of Maimorim and Chassidus. So now, Mittler Rebbe now comes, and they clearly takes it to another level, that's for sure. But the fact Matmiya, so the first thing is the Mittler Rebbe coming and completely ignoring that pshat? Or is that exactly what he's saying? Just he's adding beer to that wonder. Because it's unlikely the Mittler Rebbe obviously knew the types of the Alter Rebbe. He probably heard it, not probably, for sure heard it directly from him. And it's the same words, Matmiya. So if you read it that way, Then when you read what he says here, is the Mittler Rebbe is saying, so my first inclination then is based on that. The Mittler Rebbe is saying that this is what the Novi is matmiya. He says, like he says, that's the moyer. And he explains what means in the context of what we're learning here, since it's the moyer of the Eibishter, which is higher than the oyer. The oyer of Hashem Havaya Torah Mitzvos, that there's an element of change because before there was darkness, and then you bring light into the darkness, the light of Torah. But since you're talking about Aniyaveh, Muhusev Atzmuse, Shenikr Moyer, Harikamecha Sheikh Ka'era, there's no change. Darkness is like light. Bli Shinei Klal, and that's why nothing can darken before him. And therefore, Ulechein Gam Cheshach the Klipas Neg is not Cheshach Mi'ikore. And you don't need Eir of the Torah. Hashem doesn't need the Eir of Torah or the Eir of the Neshama to illuminate this fact. Right? So since that's the case, so that's the wonder. Now that you're aware of this level, that's completely beyond darkness and light. So why is the Nefesh Habamis not completely being absorbed in that? Because that should affect that there should be no darkness. And you don't even need Torah and Mitzvos, Torah and Neshama for that. In other words, the Mittler Rebbe is not saying that it doesn't. He's wondering why doesn't it? Since now you have that access, why doesn't it? Now that would be the Mittler Rebbe using the Alter Rebbe's approach and explaining it that way. However, the problem I have with that is, why does the Mittler Rebbe then conclude and say, and the reason is because it's Bnei Yaakov, because it's concealed. When you read it directly, it sounds like that it does affect it. Which brings us back to the original way I was explaining it, that this access of Ani Hashem Le'Shanisi, that the Nefesh Habamis reaches, albeit with the power of the Nefesh Elikis initially, because he said clearly that Nefesh Elikis has to train the animal soul in Shema Yisrael in order to reach V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha. But once it reaches there, it could be that he's saying that this wonder of the Navi is actually happening at some point, that the Nefesh Habamis indeed does get consumed. But the problem I have with that pshat is the Mittler Rebbe going with a different pshat than the Alter Rebbe when he's using the same language, matmiya? Which brings me back to the problem I had initially. What is the wonder here? Is it a wonder why it's not happening? Or is it a wonder why, in other words, the Neshama does not experience that type of Klei Nefesh, the Nefesh Habamis in this case? Or is the wonder that it ultimately does happen? And there, I still don't have clarity. I still think that I lean toward going with the Alter Rebbe's pshat, that Mittler Rebbe would not go away from that. He's not coming and saying a new pshat here, because there's other reasons for that as well. And then comes, of course, the end parentheses where he says, Efshe mitam zeh. So this one seems to indicate he's not talking about the Nefesh Habamis. He is going back to the Neshama itself, that because Ani Hashem Le'Shanisi, that also the so here he's not saying the word matmiya. He's not wondering why Bnei Yaakov, rather Bnei Yaakov shein neshamas leichalisam. But it could be that he's saying he's relying on what we know already. He says he's wondering why Bnei Yaakov, the neshamas, are not being expired when there's no darkness. So the neshama should completely be consumed in Krishma with that element of Eloi Nisi. But again, because he's bringing the idea that the darkness does not conceal, you could interpret that he's talking here that the wonder is that it does ultimately happen. And that I can't say for sure. And here I must say, as much as I tried, that maybe I'll find something that I haven't found yet in the Maimorim, but so far I haven't. It seems to me that this remains, you can interpret it both ways. You could say he's going with Alter Rebbe that it is a wonder, and indeed it does not happen, this chalisam, because of Bnei Yaakov, because it's concealed, or the Mittler Rebbe may coming and hinting that it does happen. So even though initially it's a wonder, but at some point it does happen. But he doesn't say enough. It doesn't say enough text there. There's not enough information to indicate that that's the pshat. That's why I'm still being careful whether we can go that far. But what
Where did you find this?
But the
Where did
progress
you
that I
find
did
this?
find is that I am very clear that the Alter Rebbe teaches it this way, and the Mittler Rebbe, no way is he ignoring that. The question is whether he takes it further or not. That I will still do some research and find out. So I said already, the Maimer is Mikhail Kamoicha and Lukutei Torah Rosh Hashanah, and my Morim of the Mittler and the Rebbe Rashab that quoted as well in the Samach Vav and in Ayin Beis. Page numbers I don't have right now before me. When I have them, I'll give them to you. So that's my latest findings with that. Now, especially when we continue, where he clearly comes back and says that it's through the Shema and V'hoya HaDevorim Ha'ela that we're talking about, that the Nefesh HaBamis is reaching a high level of Torah. So he's not saying the Nefesh HaBamis is reaching it without Torah. So even though he said that in the parentheses, that would seem to say that that's not a part of the wonder, and it doesn't happen. And it's just a wonder why it doesn't happen. That's why you need the answer of Bnei Yaakov. But you could also say the parentheses is hinting to a higher level. So I want to add one more thing, and that is in the Maimarim, especially earlier in Ayin Beis, I did find at length the discussion of the difference between the Oyer of Torah and Moyer of Torah. That the Moyer of Torah is accessed when you transform the animal soul itself is transformed, like the Gvuras, the bitterness itself is transformed. He said that comes from the Moyer of Torah. So here he was using the language Moyer of Torah, Moyer Sheba Machzir Lemutav, that's connected to the Moyer that's higher than Torah Oyer. So based on that, 2 points I want to make. Number one is that even though it seemed to indicate Moyer is higher than Torah, because Torah is Oyer, but I believe the real pshat is that in Torah itself there are two levels, the Oyer Torah and Moyer of Torah. It could be there's even a higher level, the Moyer, that's the source of the Moyer of Torah. That's possible. It doesn't say that explicitly, but it's possible. The second point is that the Nefesh HaBamis does access that. That's the key thing to remember. That Torah, Mitzvos itself, like he said clearly, Torah itself, at the end of the day, illuminates the darkness and is not affected by it. But transformation requires going to a higher level. That's what he said. So whether it's the Moyer of Torah or the Moyer that's higher than the Moyer of Torah, meaning the Moyer, the Balarotzen, which is the source of the Oyer of Torah, is clearly necessary to transform darkness to light. Which is why he brings in the parentheses, he's wondering why the Nefesh HaBamis is not completely consumed by that. So in either way, even if the Nefesh HaBamis on its own can't achieve that, and it needs Torah and it needs the Neshama to get it there, but there is a point where the Nefesh HaBamis is contributing something that reaches a place that's even higher than the Oyer of Torah, and in some ways higher than the Oyer of the Neshama. We're talking about the Oyer as it comes down below, because the transformation is what reaches and touches this highest level. So that's also a given. But that still doesn't affect how I was learning here. The parentheses can still be learned in both ways. I'm going to still think about it, obviously. I'm not finished with it, but I wanted to just share my findings as much as I was able to up till now. Okay. If anybody wants to ask anything, by all means.
I would like to, Rabbi. And this may just be so obvious that I have to listen again, but it says that Bnei Yaakov will never be extinguished. So if that's the case, then we're never going to be absorbed that way. We'll never be extinguished. In that sense, we will remain. Is that totally off base, or is it just a tautology? That's what he's saying.
That's a simple meaning of the verse, but the Alter Rebbe is interpreting it differently. That the prophet is wondering why the neshamas don't completely lose themselves and completely get absorbed and dissolved, like Kles HaNefesh, Kalisa, meaning lose themselves when they are aware and cognizant of the divine that is completely immutable. So this is not about. We're not talking about the Jews on earth, or the Jewish people, Am Yisrael Chai, that we are here forever. He's talking now about Navedus Hashem, the level of that Mesiras Nefesh. Why don't they lose their identity completely Not losing it in the Tanya, he says that a neshama is like a flame that wants to be consumed by its source. That's very different than being destroyed by the nations, God forbid. That can never happen. But the question is, how could they have a separate identity from God? They should be completely like a flame, wanting to be completely consumed and absorbed by its source. It's a very different interpretation, the Alter Rebbe's. And that's what he's wondering, why that doesn't happen. And the answer is because the neshamas come down, and that awareness ultimately is not complete because it's the awareness of the divine is somewhat concealed down below. Even if we are aware of it intellectually, but it doesn't affect us completely. That's what he answers. So it's a different interpretation. We're not talking here about the extinction, God forbid, of the Jewish people. We're talking here about the opposite.
I understand, but I meant in the same way that Hashem doesn't change, we can.
But that's not the Alter Rebbe is interpreting.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But there's only one God.
Yes.
So why don't the Jews completely, because of their awareness, should be completely absorbed and there's nothing else? That's not a bad thing. That's considered to be a tremendous level. It's like somebody who is so in love with the source, they want to be completely one with God. And yes, and that's not called extinction. That would be called becoming part of God himself.
Like Nadav and Avihu?
Well, they did it the wrong way. But here that's exactly what he's asking. That's what the Navi is wondering. Why don't they lose themselves in that fashion? Now you could say there's a reason they shouldn't, because we need them to be here. We want a dira b'tachtenim. We want God wants a home in this world. That's why there is concealment. And indeed, that's why they don't lose themselves in that fashion. That's fine. You can explain that. But if someone is aware of such divine presence, they should lose themselves. Nadav Avihu it was natural. When you really aware, in other words, the fact that we don't lose ourselves is not actually a sign of strength and greatness. It means because we don't really feel it's true. It doesn't resonate with us to that point.
I found something in Torah or Parshas Yisro. I just texted you on your WhatsApp, and it seems to suggest that it doesn't happen because of our sins. And everybody sins except for tzaddikim. So it's what I found, and I just skimmed through it. It seems pretty compelling. I don't know. I'm just curious to know what you think about that. I sent a link too. I didn't post it in the group yet until you say whether or not it has relevance.
It's exactly the Likutei Torah, the same thing.
Okay.
It's the exact interpretation that I was quoting. That the Navi is wondering why they don't have Klei Nefesh. And the answer is because of Bnei Yaakov, because of the concealment. It's almost word for word from the Likutei Torah.
Okay.
I didn't see it in Torah, so thank you for that. But it's essentially the same interpretation.
Okay. I just posted it for people in the class if you're curious.
Yes, it's almost word for word if I recall correctly. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what we have here. And again, I'm going to look at it more. I'll probably show it to a few people who learn Chassidus and see what they think. But interesting discussion for sure. Okay. Any other questions? So let's continue at top of page 420. So he's talked about Shema, V'ahavta, HaDevorim, Ha'ela, VShenantem levanecha v'debarta bam. And we're middle of a debarta bam. Okay, the second interpretation, and he continues, Umasha kosav, Umasha omar v'HaDevorim ha'ela, alavavcha chila. Now that you've explained the debarta bam, that it's coming down, he's going back to the first phrase, first statement. The prior one, that says in the top of page 420, where you can find the pages at iambays.com. So there it says that these words should be upon your heart. So he says that first, before VShenantem levanechem v'debarta bam. Zeu k'moshe amar d'miikara. He's bringing, this is what Chazal say, d'miikara ki ovid inish be'esek hatera adaita denafsha. The beginning, the first step, when a person mikada means initially, when a person begins to learn Torah, they're not learning Torah l'shma l'shem ha-Torah, what he just said. The second interpretation of the Debarta Bam. They learn it basically. Adaita de nafsha. Adaita de nafsha means for my interests, in a good way. Adaita nafsha means that he's applying itself to himself. Lahamshich de ein sof, to draw the of ein sof be'emtsoyis de Torah b'nishmase canal, to draw the ein sof through Torah into his neshama. Remember, we learned that Torah and neshamas, sometimes neshamas are higher than Torah, sometimes Torah is higher than neshamas. So we explained the difference is the neshamas below need Torah. That's where Torah is higher, because Torah retains that level of lishin and mehus, exactly as it was before the tzimtzum. So when we begin to learn Torah, who is dependent on whom? We're dependent on Torah. We learn the Torah to guide us. It shines the light, the guiding light, like we say, the cosmic headlights, that allow us to know what is right, what is wrong, what's kosher, what's puzzle. That's the beginning. Adaita the nafsha, the mamshich ein sof into our neshama through Torah. Like the three knots, Yisrael, Araisa, Kutsha, Brichu. So Yisrael binds itself to Torah in order to bind itself to HaKadosh Baruch, to know what Hashem wants. But then there's the other knot, where the Yidden are connecting Torah to Hashem. Once the neshamas have that guidance, and once they get elevated, and once you've ignited, so to speak, and you have activated and triggered the neshama's power, the neshama elevates. And then the neshama has power to be mashpia into Torah. That's why sometimes that we learn that the neshamas are mashpia into Torah. They're mamshich ein sof into Torah. And that's the second level, learning Torah l'shma, l'shem ha-Torah, like he says. Now you're learning in order to bring the ein sof into Torah, not to bring the Torah, the ein sof through Torah into you. So that's the first step. HaDevorim me'ela begins first learning Torah, like he says, mikada, to bring ein sof into you through the Torah. V'zeu al levavcha. That's why he says al levavcha. HaDevorim me'ela, on your heart. B'chinas makif. It's in the form of makif, meaning, I guess he means by that, al levavcha or al levavecha, because it's not internalized completely, or because it's still on your terms. Probably because the ein sof is on your terms. I'll see in a moment. I want to see where he explains. But after that first level of learning Torah, daita de nafshe, to bring ein sof into your neshama, then comes VShenantem levanecha v'debarta bam lahamshich ein sof bam v'divrei Torah. And according to the second interpretation, then comes the next level that you're bringing ein sof, you're mamshich ein sof into Torah. Obviously, a higher level of ein sof than Torah has on its own. Shezeu l'shma. That means learning Torah l'shma, meaning not for your sake, l'shem ha-Torah. For the sake of Torah. When you say something l'shma, is not. Now, sometimes the l'shma could be for ulterior motives. Here, I wouldn't call it it is an ulterior motive because it's not for Torah, it's for you. Like the difference between serving God for your interests or serving God for God's interests. But essentially, it is two different levels. So he says, and this is l'shem ha-Torah, and this is according l'fi pshat ha-kosev. This is according to the literal interpretation of the verse. Ba'amra v'devarta bam b'shivtecha b'veisecha. That you'll speak v'devarta bam. What means bam? That you will speak bam with these words, and these words b'shivtecha, in your sitting, b'veisecha, at home, l'echtecha baderech, when you travel. He just brings the first part. Shezeu himshich de Torah gam b'mokim shafel v'nomach. Okay, let's read and see. I'll see how the flow goes. I'm not positive yet. That means he's himshich, he's mamshich. Shezeu himshich de Torah. That means that he's transmitting the light of Torah also in a lowly place. Shafal is a low place. V'nomuch, they're both demonstrate lowliness. Kamoyu belechtecha baderech. And the text here sounds a little, let me just see something. I just want to see if there's another manuscript. I want to look below in the footnotes. Doesn't look like. Because it sounds like v'debarta bam b'shivtecha b'veisecha is internally in your home. And now he's saying your mamshel the Torah also in a low place, which means when you travel. Belechtecha baderech, when you're walking and you're going on a journey, on the road, outside of your home. Kumei chochmas b'chutz teruna b'rechevis. B'chutz terena. Like we learned earlier, Chachma, 2 levels of Chachma. He said that the wisdoms are lauded. Terena is like the word rina, are applauded, are celebrated outside, b'chutz, b'rechevis, in the streets. So you're talking about being mamshech Torah outside, b'lechtecha baderech, in the baderech means on the roads. U'b'shich v'chav kumecha, like he says. When you go to sleep and then when you wake up, he only brings v'shich when you go lie down. Why? Let's read on and then we'll try to make sense. He's really going through the whole Shema here, actually. Very fascinating. Ki de Torah, because the light of Torah, Meir, remember, the power of Torah is such that's not affected by Cheshach. And when you allow it in, when you magal it, it pierces everything. It's not going to be concealed by anything. But you have to allow it in, obviously. So he says, Meir gam b'cheshach. It radiates also and illuminates also in the darkness. That means even in the rechevis, even in the street, clearly, even when you're going to sleep. In other words, even when we're in lower states, the Torah reaches there too. So in other words, as he's talking here in Shema, it's going like Mamayl Lamata. After you went from V'haftas Hashem Lekecha, B'chol Avavcha, then HaDevorim Ha'ela, which is first being mamshechit. Well, I don't know what Mamayl Lamata or not. That may be wrong what I just said. Because first he says you're learning Torah to bring it into your neshama. Then you're learning Torah L'shma, V'debarta bam, to be mamshechit and stuff in Torah. But then, from V'debarta bam, you come to bringing it to B'shichta, to bring it also outside, L'echtecha baderech, and bring it down, also in the darkness, and L'kach, and therefore, Mitzvos Talmud Torah, B'tmidus B'layla Kamei B'yem. That's why Torah is mitzvahs constant. By night, like by day. Both when you go to sleep and both at night, and by day. So that's the last piece that he brought here. Now, I'm not sure the flow, because once he said l'shem ha'teira, l'fi pshat ha'kosev, first I thought that's following l'shem ha'teira is according to the meaning of the pasuk. But now I'm thinking after l'shem ha'teira, maybe it should come a comma. It should be like there's a comma or a period even. I'm not sure how l'fi pshat ha'kosev, because it seems like it's really leading into the next section. That according to the pshat of the pasuk, the debarta bam is b'shivtecha b'veisecha, to be mamshech the Torah into your home, and then on the road, etc., day and night, and even in the lower places. That's how it sounds like now, because I'm not sure if Lefi Pshat HaKosev is talking about Torah L'Shma. Unless he means that the Pshat of the Debarta Bam, that the simple interpretation of the Debarta Bam, that you're bringing Ein Sof Bam into the Torah. In other words, in contrast to the first interpretation. The first interpretation with Debarta Bam was you bring it into the darkness, into the tzutzes, you're clarifying points, and that the Torah Shabbat Peh does to clarify what's right and wrong. The Debarta Bam, and the second interpretation is that you're mamshech himself in Torah. So maybe that's what he's referring to, because he does begin the Shema Torah, and then he goes, and then you're mamshech it again into Cheshach, because Torah goes also into the Cheshach. Maybe going back and forth between the two interpretations here. One is it's in Torah, and the other that it's bring it into the darkness. Maybe that's what he's doing here. He's going back to the first interpretation as well.
Why is it?
They're not a contradiction, obviously. They're not a contradiction, obviously, because it's just both are correct. You're both mamshech. Like initially, you mamshech ein sof into the neshama, then higher you mamshech ein sof into Torah, and additionally you mamshech ein sof into the Torah's into the cheshech of the world. So they're all correct. So I don't know, but it could be that's what he's doing. First he started this, and then he went like that, then he went back. I have to read it again, but it's pretty clear. The end of the day is the whole Shema, all these sections are all about, once you've finished with the Haftarah, once you've eliminated the Ratzon Zar, the animal's desires for its own selfish needs, and now the animal soul has become consumed and absorbed in the oil, the fuel of divine love. These are the elevations that it keeps on going with the animal soul, obviously, together with the neshama, are elevating to these levels of Torah Eir. That first Advarim Ha'ela, and then VShenantem Levanecha, Debarta Bom, now B'shivtecha B'vesecha, B'lechtecha B'derech, B'shach B'cha, and B'kumecha. That's what he's saying here. So essentially, it's really becoming an all-consuming experience of the neshama, including the animal soul, of basking and being saturated with the Eir of Torah. That's in a nutshell what he's saying here. Okay, we'll stop here. Any questions?
It sounded like you were suggesting, I'm not sure by the last thing you said, you may have clarified, but that somehow learning it first, lishma, for your own VShenantem, to get yourself in line with the Or of Torah, is first, and then you go out, whatever, the Dibarta
Well,
Bam.
that's not called the Shema. That's called
Right. That's my question.
The Nafsha.
Well, that's my which is not lishma.
The first step, he said clearly, it's a daita de nafsha, which means
Oh, you're doing it for yourself? Is that your point?
It's about bringing, let's use the exact words, being mamshich erein sof in his neshama through Torah. You're drawing erein sof through Torah into the neshama. That is called a daita de nafsha. That's not called l'shem ha-Torah. The Shema means you're doing it for Torah, not for your neshama.
Thank you.
That's what he says here. Yeah.
We learned the Ma'amad Torah Tzivalono Moshe by the Rebbe Yeshab. It seems to be a similar theme.
I don't know. I'm not sure what Ma'amad you're referring to.
Didn't we learn the Torah Tzivalono? There was by the Rebbe Yeshab years ago, or am I confusing with something else? Maybe I'm not sure.
I would have to see it inside. I don't know if it's connected to this. I'm not sure. Okay. He's not finished. There's more in Shema. After that comes the Mitzvos. So based on Ayin Beis, where he talks about that, there's the Birur. So essentially, there are three things here. There's the Neshama being elevated, there's the Torah being elevated, and there's the darkness being elevated. And they're all part of this process. First begins with the neshama affecting the nefesh habamis. Then Torah comes into the picture. So first it begins with the neshama benefiting from Torah's Eir Ein Sof. Then from there we move to the Torah being benefited from the Eir Ein Sof, then the neshama is mamshich. And then he says that all of this comes down also in affecting the choshech, day and night, and the darkness, even the lower places. So remember, the Nefesh Habamis is experiencing all of this. That's the beauty of all of it, that it's not just Nefesh Habamis has been taken care of and now it's left alone, and the divine soul itself is continuing its elevation. It's all part of this process. It's all binding together in one seamless unity, if you wish, which will explain why there was such elaboration by the Rebbe Rashab at the end of Ayin Beis, based on the Mismizl Rebbe's Maimer, of the lengthy discussions of Yehuda Tata and Yehuda Ilah, and how because it's all about training the animal soul of all the levels of unity to ultimately experience the highest singularity, which is Hashem Echad, in everything we do, from top to bottom, from the highest levels to the lowest levels. Remember, in the beginning of the process, there's no way that you can experience Eir Ein Sof Mamish, Lav Torah, in this world. It's just like you can't begin when you teach a child at 5 years old, you're teaching them Aleph Beis, or Bechomesh Mikra, the verses. You can't expect that they should have the full experience of divine Torah and all the Elokus. We have to grow, the Kalim have to expand. So the same thing in Avodah. This dark world, the first step is to get the darkness to start dispelling and allowing in some of the light. And as the light manifests, and then as the kalim of this world, this material world gets transformed, you can start drawing higher and higher. But the goal is ultimately to get to Ani Hashem Leishanisi, to get to a level of Torah as a manifest without exactly as B'lifnei Tzimtzum, after the Tzimtzum. B'lishini Mahus Klal. But of course, that doesn't happen immediately. That happens in stages. So the first stage is obviously that's why we have to go through stages. That's why in davening, if you remember, Psukkah de Zimri, he said, was weeding the weeds, getting rid of the weeds, and Zimra from the word Zamer Aritzim. And then slowly you start refining the animal soul and start softening it up by connecting it to its source, to the Malachim, and then coming to Shema. And he's continuing the process here of this is really the avodah of we do on a daily basis. Chassidim, obviously the Mittler Rebbe is offering us a blueprint of how to daven and what to think about. And it's really a step-by-step process of transforming your very selfish animal soul that began as a selfish animal soul into a divine creature, into a divine entity, together with, of course, the Nefesh Alekis. And that's where the Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam and the Ner Mitzvah and the Torah all come together. So let's continue reading. He's going to now go back to Ner Mitzvah, I believe, where he says like this. Then comes next. What comes after V'shalchav Kumecha? That's Torah. Then he says, V'masha Omar, V'masha Kosa, V'kshartem leis ayadecha. The next best is that you should bind la'ez, the tefillin, you should bind as a sign. V'chsaftem. That's V'chsaftem al mezuzahs. And you should write them down, write these words down in mezuzahs. So in other words, you're binding the words of Torah in tefillin on your arm and on your head. V'chsaftem, and you're writing them down in mezuzahs. Zeu yiridas ha'er d'Torah gam b'maisa b'dvarim gashmi. This is the next step. You're drawing down the air of Torah also in maisa, in action, not just in speech. Till now we're talking about thought, speech. Now, b'maisa, b'dvarim gashmi, physical things, the datzcham of daimim tzemeya chai medaber. K'may b'klav the tefillin, like the parchment of tefillin. Now, this is all coming from Torah, because Torah teaches us what these mitzvahs are. U'k'may sha'amar, huksha kol ha'Torah l'tefillin. So tefillin, even though it's one mitzvah, so it says huksha kol ha'Torah, the entire Torah is huksha, is compared to, is comparable to tefillin. Before we said Talmud Torah keneged kulam. So this place that explains the difference. But bottom line, tefillin is not just an isolated single mitzvah. The whole Torah is huksha, is comparable to it. Ukamoi shepasha shma nichtova beklaf, and just like now, the pasha shma. What's inside tefillin? What's inside mezuzah? The pasha of Shema. The Shema, very Shema we're talking about. But till now, we've been saying it and contemplating on it. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And the contemplation he discussed. Now he's saying, V'kshartem. Now you should bind it to your arm. V'chsaftem, and you should write it down. So now we're getting into the action. You're bringing it down into ma'isa, into action. So the Shema, nichteva beklaf. So just as Shema is written on the parchment, kach kol ha-mitzvahs heim b'asiyah gashmis. So too it is with all the mitzvahs. Since huksha kol ha-Torah kula l'tefillin, so the whole Torah compared to tefillin, so just like tefillin is manifesting in a physical way, Shema, so too all the mitzvahs are manifesting godliness in a physical action, b'asiyah gashmis, in physical in b'asiyah. V'chein v'chsaftem al mezuzahs. And the same is with the chsaftem on mezuzah, like tefillin. You're writing it down on mezuzah, on the parchment of a mezuzah. It's all bringing it down into action. Why? Now he's going back to the essential theme which we've already used twice. First in Torah Shabbat Peh, then he used it with the Nefesh Abamis. Now he's using it on mitzvahs maisis. The Noz Tchilosim B'Seifan. Remember, Seif Maisa B'Machshav Tchil. The Eibishter wants everything in Asiyah. He doesn't want it to remain only in thought and speech, or only on sublime contemplative levels, meditation. The beginning is wedged in the end, dafke. V'seif ma'isa dafke, hu sha'ola b'machshava tchila. and the end of the action, meaning all the way down to an action-based behavior, dafka, that's what arose in his initial thought. So the initial plan, all the way in the highest levels of the moyer and the balarats in the highest levels, even higher than everything that we've been talking, is not that you remain a level of oyer, but it should come down into the physicality of this world. And this is the union of mitzvahs that are called the candle. Till now we've been talking about the mile of Torah. Now he's saying we're bringing it down to the neir, k'meshakosov k'ner mitzvah, shekel shemen upsila eir. So now he's bringing it all together. Till now we talked about the neshama, talked about Torah, and now comes down to ner mitzvah, which encompasses all three things: oil, wick, and the light, the flame. Behainu, this is referring to kol mitzvahs. This is referring to all the mitzvahs. Shenasim b'dvarim gashmim de klipas nega. Mitzvahs that are made of, all the mitzvahs are made of physical items that come from klipas nega. The parchment was hide of an animal. The same thing with other mitzvahs. Miklav the tefillin, from the parchment of tefillin, Bitzemer the tzitzis, the wool of tzitzis, ukahai gavna, and similarly all the other mitzvahs. Shebehen yeir, what do we want to achieve? That in this physicality of the mitzvahs, in this ner mitzvah, yeir the Torah. We want them not just to have the flame on a lower level, but want them to have the eir of Torah, the high level of eir of Torah, that's completely up from before the tzimtzum, that is untouched. That eir, k'meshakosov v'Torah eir, that's the hemshach. V'ner mitzvah, k'ner mitzvah v'Torah eir. Lahamshich behem gili eir ensof gam b'dvarim gashmim dafke. To be mamshich within them in the mitzvahs, the gili eir ensof of Torah, all the way also into the physical matter, dafke, and dafke there, not just to remain above, but dafke in physical, mishum de nesav eliyas le'dir b'tachtenim dafke. Because that's what the desire of Atzmus is, that there be dafka dir b'tachtenim, a home in this lowest of worlds. Because if you go just Torah eir accomplishes his job even in Atzilus. But the goal is that it should come down into action, like we learned, Seif Maisa. Remember, we learned also, even Torah Sheba Ksav, we learned is only a blueprint. And you want it to be an actionable document, a working document, that was Torah Shema Peh. But more than that, you want the action actually be done. The actual action of the mitzvahs. Dafke dir b'tachtenim. Kamoy b'klav the tefillin. Like when we take, like in the klaf, in the parchment of tefillin, you're taking actual physical matter that was part of an animal, and you're turning it into tefillin, a mitzvah, a mitzvah of Hashem. Umezuzah dafke. And the same thing, the parchment of a mezuzah. Ukahai gavna, and etc., and similar to all other mitzvahs. V'zeu shekosav v'shemen al reishach, or al reishcha, al reishach. That the shemen al reishach, that you put the oil. We said this canal. He brought this pasuk earlier. I believe it was. They don't say it before. I need to look it up earlier. And he explained what means al reishach, because first of all, shemen al reishach means you're bringing the oil, and that oil, which on its own was initially secular, if you wish, or mundane, and you turned it, it becomes al reishach, above your reish, because it's reaching higher than even the reish, because of not chilas and b'seif and seif ma'isa olam machshavet chila. He said that earlier when he talked about mitzvahs. I have to find it earlier. So, but it's the same idea that he said with the nefesh habam, is the idea that once you're manifesting it in Gashmi, there's something that adds, that reaches us back all the way to the highest levels. So basically, vidal, canal, vidal, the dai lemevin. And it's enough for those that understand, for the mevinim, for the mevin. So now we have it all tied together. And I believe when we go back to the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, this will really come together in a beautiful way. Because you have now all aspects. You have the Neshama Israel, you have the role of the mitzvah, you have the role of Torah, you have the role of the Nefesh Habamis, and they're all coming together in one glorious and one beautiful mosaic, each one doing their role. So in Torah Eir, he made it clear that even though Torah Eir is higher than their mitzvah, but he said, Ikra v'yisedasan of Torah manifests in mitzvahs. Because Torah is telling us what to do, but mitzvahs is when we actually do it. So on one hand, when you do the mitzvah, you don't have the whole the whole the whole literature, if you wish. I don't even want to use that word. The whole background material of the understanding of Hashem's mind, of why he wanted this mitzvah and all the details and the whole pilpul. How did you come to the conclusion that this is kosher and this is not? When we eat matzah Pesach night, you're doing the mitzvah. You're not sitting and learning Hilchos Matzah. You're not learning Pesach Pesachim. You may have learned it earlier, but this action is informed by a whole tractate called Masechta Pesachim, and by hundreds of pages of halacha and hundreds of pages of analysis of why we eat a matzah and how we eat a matzah and all the details. But the bottom line is the action is the mitzvah. That's why it's a ner. A ner is a small flame compared to oil. Torah, on the other hand, is the whole expanse of Aruchem Eretz Midor Rechava Miniyam. Torah is Ein Sof. Torah is not about limits. Torah speaks and gives us the guidelines of the parameters. But Torah itself is Ein Sof, unbridled, complete expansiveness of the divine Ein Sof. But the Eibishter wants the Ein Sof, the infinite, to be packaged in the finite. So the mitzvahs are taking the infinite of the Torah and drawing it into a finite structure. It still remains infinite, as Chassidus explains in Samach Vav and other places. But it is a joint. So Ner Mitzvah is a candle that's leading to Torah Eir. And Torah Eir, in turn, informs the candle of the mitzvah. And all of that enriches the neshama in its work, because a neshama without Torah mitzvahs would not have the tools and the resources needed to reach these high levels. The neshama be'etzem comes from even higher level. But as it comes down below, the neshama can only do that much in its contemplation and effect on the animal soul. But when you take the ner Hashem nishma sadam, which is a ner, and you add the ner mitzvah and the Torah Eir, then the impact on the neshama and on the nefesh habamis, which the neshama is, of course, constantly training and educating, then you have this elevation through all these levels. Ner mitzvah, Torah Eir, where you have both the bli gvul of Torah, you have the gvul of mitzvahs, and you have it all coming down to this world into Adir b'tachtenim. Now, all this is definitely going to help us understand Ayin Beis. But that I'll leave for when we resume after Pesach, how it all comes to explain the ideas of Ayin Beis, because Ayin Beis is all about this interface, and the Rebbe Rashab, the end of Ayin Beis, that's what he was setting up. He was talking about Torah Eir, their mitzvah, and Eir Hariyah, and all the other themes, including the neshama, after he's spoken at length about mamata lamayla, mamayla lamata. So it's all about a combination of mamata lamayla, mamayla lamata. All this will be discussed. I've not forgotten, obviously, that's on my mind all the time. That's where we're headed. And this is ultimately where we're leading. That's a safe maisa in our context of learning all this material. But I'm going to stop here at the end of this paragraph, because it definitely finishes a subject matter, even though the mimer is not over. There's still more to go. He wants to talk about Ner Chanukah, and then he's going to go back to Magbil L'Sheves. But we are coming to to the end. There's another 14 pages to this mimer. But this theme of Ner Mitzvah Torah Eir and Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, I'm not going to say it's finished. There's more to be added, but we have a lot now, much more than we had before, because he brought together answered questions, and we understand what the role of each one plays in this magnificent picture here. So I will stop for any questions. And
Is the prior reference V'Shem Roshcha Lo Ichsar? Is that I posted something in the group. Is the prior reference, is that the one on page 401?
could be. I didn't see, but I can look. If it's brought there, then yeah, it looks like it. Is that the first time it's mentioned? But it's definitely mentioned there. Yeah,
not the first time. The other one had to do with Ner Hashem Nishma Sadam, and it works there too. But we're here. We're talking about.
Yeah, this sounds like it. Looks like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, looks like it. Yeah. So any questions about this whole discussion here?
I had a I don't know. I just had this insight. I don't know if it's a chiddush at all, and if it is, it's not mine. It's just something you said. You were talking about why it says Bnei Yaakov instead of Bnei Yisrael. That the ekev, the heel, should follow the words of Torah, and it seems to me that it's an interesting application of the function of the nefesh Bahamos in its capacity to act physically in this lowest of worlds, which is not really a world that is terribly welcoming or of the nefesh elokis, but rather that even the akev, the heel, as in our physicality, is what enables us to implement the words of Torah and to do the mitzvahs and to talk about them and to teach them, and all these actions we talked about in Shema. Is Dabke, the nefesh Bahamos, is working in partnership with the nefesh elokis to spread Torah into the world. So even though it's the akev, it's the lowest part of the body, and whereas the nefesh elokis resides in the head. So nevertheless, you need your feet to do the walking, and to make things happen in this world. So it's like a partnership, if you will. First, you have to harness the nefesh Bahamos to get it to be in line with the mission, if you will. And once you got it in line with the mission, it's like literally, pardon the pun, it's like a foot soldier getting the work done, doing the Birim in this lowest of worlds. The Ekev is, I just thought about that. What do you think?
I think it seems obvious to me. I mean,
okay, yeah.
I mean, you're talking about bringing down the divine into this world. I mean,
yeah, but they're saying Bnei Yaakov. I mean, the Indian of the Ekev, that the lowest of us, of who we are, is necessary for the implementation of God's plan. In other words,
that's what he just said explicitly. He said,
"I know."
And that Nesava Kadosh Baruch Dir B'Tachteinim Dafke.
Right, but I'm coming back to
you're adding to that.
No, well, in a little bit. Why is it not localism? Why is the nefesh Bahamos not dissolved, if you will, into the?
You see, the Rebbe that's the Alter Rebbe's interpretation. Here, he doesn't come to explain why it doesn't get dissolved. So.
Well, I'm postulating it wouldn't. We couldn't have a dira. We couldn't bring godliness into this lowest of worlds.
That's what I said before when Robin asked me that. I said exactly that. Of course, but it still doesn't help us. I thought you're trying to explain the parentheses.
No, not necessarily.
Oh, yeah, that's correct. I said that explicitly. Absolutely. That there's a reason why there was this whole concealment to bring it down to this levels.
Yeah. What parentheses were you referring to?
The big parentheses about Lo Shanisi and Bnei Yaakov Lo Chalisam that I began the class with, trying to explain what the Mittler Rebbe is saying in context. Is it in context of the Alter Rebbe? Is it an addition? Is it different? That's what I'm referring to.
Mm-hmm. No class until next Thursday before you stop the recording?
Right.
A week from this Thursday, the 2nd of May.
Correct, because Yom Tov ends on Tuesday, right? Wednesday I'm traveling, so Thursday. A week from
this Thursday.
Yes. Okay, we'll stop here. I think it's a good place to stop. End of the paragraph on page 420.